Hello everybody and welcome back to DJ Tutorials. This is part 4 of our geometric composition series and we're going to be going over UV unwrapping. And basically what we're going to be doing is showing how to unwrap your objects in a way to map a 2D image onto it to then in the next part add some more realistic materials and it will give us a little bit more realism to our overall composition in the end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. And don't be afraid. I'm going to do my best here to make this simple and understandable for you guys. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start uh, with the cube here. And we're going to go up here and we're going to slide over here to this tab and it's called UV editing. And go ahead and click that and you'll see there's a bunch of stuff going on here. Um, so uh, Again, this is a fairly complicated for a lot of people subject, and I'm going to do my best, like I said, to explain this and do this in a very um, easy way so that you can see what's going on here. So we're going to hit / to isolate this into local view. And what we're going to do here, I'm going to hit Shift A to deselect everything, and I'm going to hit A to select everything. And if you look over here on the left and we zoom in, you'll see there's a cross here. Now, this cube isn't religious. This just happens to be how it's unwrapped. And what UV unwrapping means is it basically means that the object is being projected onto a 2D grid, kind of like a piece of paper. If you were to cut this cube into different pieces, if you ever made a cube or something like that in school and sort of like taped it together or whatever, this is kind of what you would do. You would kind of like take this, roll it up, and get these pieces sort of put together. And there are a lot of images. If we do a search for UV Unwrapped Cube, we'll probably see some sort of representation. Here's one right here. So if we open this, and we take a look at this, you can see here is the cube. Here it's being unwrapped, and there it is fully unwrapped right there. So you can see it's sort of that cross pattern right there. And this is from Wikimedia Commons. So you can kind of see what's going on there. Kind of a hard concept to wrap your head around, especially with more complex objects. But like I said, this is for beginners, and this is just kind of understanding what this is. So how this is done is by creating what's called seams. And what we're going to do is we need to make sure that we're in edit mode here. So if you're not in edit mode, make sure that you either select that here or you hit tab. And what we want to do is we want to mark seams in our cube here to basically be places where it will be cut to make this shape, because this is the actual correct way of doing this. But we're going to do this from the beginning so that it sort of makes more sense to us in our brain. And how we're going to do this is we're going to left click here or here or here and just, get used to selecting these edges. And what we want to create is that cross shape. And if we hit A here and we look at this, there should be one plane or one face at the top, then one face in the middle with a face on either side, a face here below, which would make sort of a plus sign, and then below that, one more face. So 1, 3, 1, and 1. So if we take a look at this cube, I'm going to hit 1 here so that we're looking at it from the front. And let's move our angle here so we are looking at the top. This is going to be this plane. And you can see here that the top, there's not more here. So there's a seam here, and there's a seam here. So in order to replicate this, or something close to it, we need to select this edge here, select this edge here, this edge here, and this edge here. Let me actually turn on my screencast keys so that you can see what's going on. And let's see, there we go. So it's over here on the left. So again, if I hit A and we look at this, seam, seam, seam for this top face. So if we're looking at this top one here, we need a seam here, hold shift, a seam here, and a seam here. And once you have those selected, right click and go down to mark seam. And you'll see that it's now changed to this red color here. So that's for this top face. Then this should be here, this face here, and this face here, and this face here. So if we look here, there's the face. So this is again the middle, so it's here. This is the right face, and this is the left face. So what that means is, since this is cut and that's cut, there should be seams on those edges. So we should see, if we're looking at this from this angle, there should be a seam above, which there already is, a seam here, and a seam down here. So make sure that you shift and left click to select both of these, right click, mark seam. And now we have the top, the left side, and now the right side, which should look the same. And if I hit A again to look at this right face should have a seam here and a seam here. Right click, mark seam. So now we have, if I hit A, we have the top face here, the middle here, which there is no seam, because if we look at how this is unwrapped, there's no seam here. It's not cut, it's just together. Then over here, you can see that there should be a seam, which there is right there. Here, there's a seam. And then here, there's a seam, and the same on this side. Now, if we go down, we sort of like roll our camera down a little bit. This is now this face. So again, this is the middle here, and then rotating down, this is this face here. So if we're looking at this, this should have a seam on the left, and there should also be a seam on the right. And if we look at this, if I deselect all, you can see that we already have a seam here and a seam here. And if I hit A again, that's exactly what should be represented. And then at the bottom, it should be open to be connected to this face here. Now if I move my camera and we take a look at this face here, and again, just to make sure that we're oriented correctly, because I don't want to lose you guys, I'm now looking at the top. So if I hit 7, this is the top view. And if I hit A, this is our top face. I'm rolling down on the camera, middle, left, right. We're at the middle again, rolling down. This is this one here that has a seam here and a seam here. And now this last one, this face right here, we should see a seam on the left side, the right side, and the bottom. And if we roll the camera more, now the camera's upside down basically, and we deselect everything, we can see that there's a seam on the left, the right, and the bottom. And if I hit A, that's what we're seeing here, left, right, bottom. This is the best way I can explain it, and hopefully this was good enough for you. I struggled with this a lot, and I still struggle with it quite a bit, and I'm sure that if I did this tutorial series to help explain how this is working and took the time like this to do it when I was beginning, it would have saved me a lot of headache later. So what we're going to do from here, now that we've marked our seams, is we're going to hit U, Unwrap, left click here, and we can see that we have created the cross shape here. It's not exactly the same as it was before because it's sort of like on its side, but if we hit A over here, hit R, hold Control, we can actually rotate that to be like this, and then left click to apply. And just like in here where you hit, let's actually go to object mode so I don't screw anything up. If I hit G and move this around, you can kind of move it in three-dimensional terms here. Right click to undo that. Or you can left click and hit Control Z. Now, if we go back into edit mode, hit A to select all here, and then hit G, we can actually move this around. And this is more accurate to our actual shape since I have scaled this up a little bit on the Z That's why my cubes here, or my faces, are more elongated than perhaps yours if you kept it a regular cube. And just to keep this, you know, easy with our grid here, I'm just going to make sure this is nice and aligned inside. And I'm actually going to go up here and I'm going to turn this on. It's called snapping. And I'm going to attach it to the increment. So when I move it, you can see that it's on the grid lines now. And I'm just going to put that right in the center there. So now what we're going to do, just so that you can understand this a little bit more, we're actually going to add a different material to this object and get rid of one that we had. Now what you'll want to do before you do this is you'll want to hit, actually, no, let's do this. Over here, you're going to press on this right here that says new, okay? Click, and we're going to call this UV underscore grid. And change the width. We're going to multiply this, so click over to the side here, and we're going to hit multiply on our number pad. We're going to multiply that by 2, and then we're going to multiply this by 2 as well. And what we're going to do here on this drop down, we're going to pick UV grid and deselect alpha, and hit OK. And if we zoom out, this is making a UV grid, which helps us sort of visualize what's happening with this object. So really quick, what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to the shading tab, left click to select your cube. Let's go into isolation mode, or local view again with /. And in this node editor here, move your mouse here, hit Shift A, and then you're going to add, go down to texture, and then go to image texture, and left click to put that in there. Click this drop down and select UV grid, then left click this and drag it into the base color. And you can see right here, this is how the image looks, the UV grid that we have mapped to our cube. Pretty cool, right? So you can kind of see how on our grid over here, let's hit / here really quick so that we can actually see this. When we come back, we don't get confused. So let's go over back to the UV editing, and you can see that that's what's being projected here. If I look over here if I hold Z material preview, you can see the UV grid here. And if I go in this window and I hit G and move this around, let me hold control here so that, because I have snapping on, let's actually turn that off. If I hit G and I move that, you can see over on the right panel here that the UV grid is actually moving around. And you can actually try, if you want to line up this stuff and all that, which is really not that important right now. I just wanted to show you how this works and how you can see how your seams and everything is lining up with your objects. And we're going to be using this sort of material on the rest of our objects just to look at how the UV grid or the UV unwrapping is working on our objects. So once you're done with the cube here, and you might need to rewind this quite a bit to take a look at what I've been explaining here, because it is a little bit hard to wrap your head around at first, and I don't mean that to be like uppity or condescending or whatever. It's just, it really is a weird concept, and I struggle with it all the time. It sounds like I really know what I'm talking about probably, and it's just from lots of practice and making mistakes. So let's go ahead and hit /. And now we're going to go to the sphere. Left click that. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into isolation, or the local view, by hitting /. I call it isolation because it's what makes sense to me. And we're going to change this. If we click this little down arrow, we can actually change this to the red cube, just so that we can see how the UV unwrap is working. And you can see that there's nothing here. There is no UV information. If we go and if we hit tab and hit A, you can see that there's nothing here in our UV previewer here. There's no information available. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take the same principal concepts that we did in the last object, and we're going to use those same principles here for this sphere. Now, it's not the best way of doing this, but I want to sort of drive the point home of what this really means. So remember, this is a rounded cube. So since it's a rounded cube, we can kind of use the same method in unwrapping to actually get this projected onto this here in any sort of understandable way. So if we hit 7, we know that what we want is a top area of the cross. We want a plane that has seams on the left, right, and top. And if we look at this right here, these lines represent the edge of a cube. And if I left click on this edge and I hit 7, basically you can see there's kind of like a rounded box here. And we want the left side, the top, I'm holding shift and left clicking these, and the right side here to be marked as seams to match our cube. Right click, mark seam. Then if we move down to the front view or hit 1 and we don't want to left click that actually. What we want is the middle face. These right here represent the middle of that cross. All of these right here. Alt A to deselect. So if I swing the camera to the left, this should be the left face of the cross from that cube that we did. And if we go to face select here, we know that there should be a seam here. So if we left click here, 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 and then the bottom, because remember it's the left face that was kind of by itself but attached to the middle, left click this here, and then right click mark seam. Now we have top face, middle, and then on the left we have the left face. Swing the camera over to the right, and we want to do the same thing here. There should be a seam at the bottom, and then a seam on the right side here. Right click, mark seam, and now we have top, middle, left, right face of that cube, and this is just the rounded cube. So then, if we swing the camera down more, this should be the face that has a connection to the middle, and then eventually a connection to the bottom of our cross. So we don't want to do anything here. And then if we go to the back side, just like before, this is the bottom face of the cross that we made. So there should be a seam on the left, the bottom, and the right side, and you can see that it's already done. So if you hit A, U to unwrap, click on unwrap, you can see here it's made our cross. Hit A to select all over here in this window, hit R to rotate, and I'm holding control here to just lock it to a more easy rotation so it's not just whatever, it's just kind of like easier to set up on a grid. Left click to place it, hit G to move it, and let's actually snap to increment here. Hit G and we will, that doesn't seem to move, let's scale it down a bit and let's just try to place it in the center somewhere. And if we take a look at this, you can see that now it's unwrapped and it's very similar to our cube. And if we look closely, what you can see here on the seams, you can see that there is a cut that goes along here. And if we hit Tab and we hit A over here to select all of these and we start moving this around, I'm actually going to turn off snapping up here, and we move this around, you can see that that seam, it really doesn't look that great. And when we add a 2D image texture into here, it actually causes problems because you can actually see where that seam is. Now, a little note here. If you're doing what's called baking out textures later, and you're using a different method to project your textures onto the object, like painting it or something like that, this could work just fine. But since we're going to be using a 2D image to map to this, we're going to use a different method. But we're going to come back to that later. We're just going to leave this as is right now. Hit tab, front slash, and now we're out. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do this cube here. And let's go ahead and change this now. Let's change this to the red cube just because it already has this on it. And you can see that it's already projecting something here because it already has some sort of UV coordinates. But we're going to change that. So let's make sure you have it selected, hit front slash to go into local view, and then hit tab to go into edit mode. And let's change this. We're going to left click up here and let's just change it to, well, that's not really going to help us. Well, hopefully you guys can see this and it doesn't hurt your eyes too much. So if I hit A, you can kind of see how everything's unwrapped. And if you take a look here on the top, you have the you have all of these in a line here, which is all of, and if I go over here, hit faces, Alt A to deselect everything, and hold Alt and left click here, you can see that this is all of the side faces. And then if I left click the top, you can see that it's selected the this area here, and the bottom, it is this area here. And you can see that it's already set seams for us on this object. No. Okay, let's hit stop. Okay, this is going to be part B to, or this is going to be the B section to part 4, UV unwrapping. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to tackle this cylinder here. And what we're going to do is we're going to select it again. We're going to go front slash for local view, and we're going to hit tab to go into edit. And yours should have something similar to this, which is basically that it's already been sort of unwrapped. And if it isn't, that's okay. I'll show you how to get this looking like this. It's a little hard to see. I'll hit A so you can kind of see it. Sorry about the UV grid here, but you know, it is what it is. It basically has the side planes here, and then the top and bottom are here. So if I go in on this side, go to face select, hold Alt, Alt A to deselect everything, hold Alt, left click here, you can see that when I select that edge loop of faces, it's all of this up here. Then if I left click the top, you can see that here is the top, and then if I go down to the bottom and I left click that, there's the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually do this so that you can understand what's happening here. So in order for us to unwrap this, we need the top to be by itself, the bottom to be by itself. So very simply, hold Alt, and you can see this is blue. That's from when we added the, if I left click on this and I go to item, you can see that that's the mean bevel weight there when we added that. So if I hold left click and I select this top, let me go to wireframe here so it's a little bit easier to see. We go to select this top edge loop with Alt and left click. You'll want to right click and mark that as a seam because we want that to be by itself. Then at the bottom, you'll want to Alt left click that as well, right click and mark seam. Now if we just do this, if we hit A and we unwrap here, you can see that this happens, where you get this crazy spiral here and other weirdness, and you have these up here. Those look fine. This is the, if I go to face select, and you can see that's the top and that's the bottom there. Let me go to solid mode. Let's actually, let's go to material preview here. And let's actually go and change this to the red cube. And look at that. Look how weird that is, right? If we hit A, that's what's happening here. It didn't know what to do with this, and it just unwrapped it in a weird way. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add another seam to this so that it unwraps in an easier way. Now there are multiple ways to deal with this, but we're going to just add a seam since that's what we've been doing, and I'll show you what happens when we do that. So how do you get it to where all of these sides will be unwrapped and it will be um, uh, like basically at a cut and it will like wrap correctly? Well, what you really want to do is you want to add a vertical, let me go to edge select here. You want to add a vertical cut because that will allow it to unwrap, and this area here, all of these sides will be able to be kind of like unrolled flat. Okay. And so what we'll do is what you kind of want to, be in a practice of if you're just doing 2D image texturing on top of something and you're not doing painting or anything like that, you want to make sure that whatever your seam is not being seen by the camera. You want to try and make sure it's kind of hidden. That's why we have the seam up here and the bottom is because there's already an angle change there. But what we want to do is if we hit 0, this is our camera view, we can pop out of there. We want to put something on the back. So we're going to go to the back and we're going to select, let's say this one here, right click, mark seam, and now hit A, U to unwrap, unwrap. And look what it did. That's almost what we had before, except for all of this on the left here was on the top. So to sort of mimic that over here, hit R, make sure everything is selected by hitting A, hit R, hold control, rotate it around, and then we can go up here to snap to increment, hit G, and hold, we might have to actually zoom in a little bit, hit G and hold shift, and we should be able to get it on. It looks like it's not really going to work. So instead, we're just going to hold shift or hold control or undo the snapping up here and just sort of get that a little bit closer here. And that looks okay there. And let's try turning this on again and hitting G, and there we go. So that should have worked. That should make it nice and even on your edges here. Oh, see, it looks like it's not exactly right here. So let's do that there. So I just, if you have this on, you can hit G and hold control and it kind of like negates the snapping, or you could just go up here and turn it off. And that should get us where we kind of need to be. And you can kind of zoom in if you want and line that up. It really doesn't matter that much. Now, here you might run into a little bit of an issue if these are too close, and you might want to move these, and that's really easy. All you have to do is hit Alt A here, and you can make sure that this box select here, select box is selected. Left click and drag to select these vertices, hit Control plus as many times as it takes until you get the full object or the full area there, and then hit G and you can kind of move that around. And the same thing with this one here. Make a little box select here, Control plus, and then hit G and move it to where you want. So fairly easy to sort of like manipulate this stuff once you've done this. Now, like I said, there's other ways to do this, maybe better ways, but this is how we're doing it for this particular project. So let's hit tab over here, hit front slash to get out of there, and let's tackle this cone. So before we tackle this cone, go ahead and change the material over to the red cube, which is what we've been using for all of this. And let's go ahead and do some UV editing and marking some seams on this. So let's hit front slash and let's take a close look at this. And you can see that it's kind of weird here. And if we hit tab to go into edit mode and we take a look here, you can see that it's kind of, doing the same thing as it did before with the cylinder, but it's mapping a little bit strangely. And we're going to actually we're going to go ahead and unwrap this so that we can actually get this to fit a little bit better than this sort of funky method that's going on here. Um, at least differently than what's being shown here. We're going to mark the seams and we're going to do the same thing like we did with the cylinder that we did before. So uh, see if that works, since this is basically a cylinder with a smaller top. So if you go down here, hold left, make sure you're going to edge select, hold Alt, left click the bottom, go up to the top, and hold Alt, Shift, left click the top. And then we want to make sure that we go to the back of the object. And since we're doing the same thing as we did with the cylinder, hold Shift. And if you need to, you can go to solid mode. That's probably a better way to do this. So solid mode, select the bottom, select the top, and select the back here. Right click, mark seam. And now we have a seam on the top face, a seam on the bottom, and then a seam on the back, so that we can sort of mimic what we did before. Hit A to select everything, hit U to unwrap, and select unwrap. And you can see it's basically done this thing here. And this is more correct of what we actually want to see with our cone here because of the way that it is. Now you can have it like it was before, but like really these planes, these faces here, the way that an object or a 2D image should wrap to this is more akin to this because the top should be smaller. This section here, you want that to be a little bit smaller than it was before. You'll kind of have to trust me on this. If you try to map a 2D image to the other way, it does look a little bit funky because technically the top would need to be smaller than the bottom. Otherwise, the image will scale in a weird way. So it's hard to explain. Experiment with it if you want and throw a 2D image on it once you know how to do it. But for right now, just trust me on this. I'm going to rotate this like we did before. We're going to rotate this. I'm going to hold Control, put it there, move it up so it's more at the top of the UV grid, and then you can see here the top is very small, like it should be. Whereas before it was like really big. If you remember, it was as big as the bottom. That would be a really weird way of having it unwrap. Or mapping a 2D image to it. It should be more like this because this is more proportional. My bottom is a little bit off of the grid here when we zoom in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to box select this. By the way, if you want to have something else here, you can hit B and then left click and drag if you want for a box select. Hit Control plus until we have the entire area here, and you can tell if it's the entire area because it fills in with yellow. Hit G and hold Shift and just place it here. Now, when we go to object mode and we look at material preview, you can see there's the bottom, there's the side, and then there's the top. But what's going on here? Well, basically the geometry of this object is getting really small kind of fast for how many slices or how much geometry we actually have in our object. And what we want to do is we actually are going to need to add geometry to this cone so that this doesn't warp like this. And it will end up looking like this when we map a 2D image. So very simply, we're going to go back into edit mode, hit Control R to add a loop. Make sure it's right in here, left click, and then drag it up. You can see that when we did that, it has smoothed out all of what we were seeing before. And if we zoom over to the back, you can see there's that seam I was talking about. So like basically when you unwrap something, you want it hidden in the back where the seam actually is when you're mapping a 2D image to something. That's why we want to hide it, is that right there. Now, is this the best way to do a cone for what we're doing? Maybe not, but I'm really like the point of this is to teach you how the UV unwrapping works. So that is basically how that works. And you can see that adding that loop cut here has changed how it's mapping the top section. If you hit tab, you can actually select this loop cut again by holding Alt. Then if you want to shift it or move it more to the top or the bottom, double tap G or hit G twice. You can move it to the top or bring it back down to the bottom. And if you still feel like it's not enough, you can hit R or Control R here, add another loop cut, and still control a little bit more of that top section if you need to. I don't think it needs it. I think it's completely fine just like that. And you'll see when we start mapping the 2D image, it's going to work just fine. Let's hit / to get out of here. And that's what we saw before when I showed you the render of what these UV unwraps look like. Before we continue on and we end this tutorial, I'm actually going to show you the proper way to unwrap this sphere, because later we will run into problems with this object, because from the camera's point of view, we can actually see those seams. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a different method to unwrap this object than using the seams and UV unwrap. So make sure that you have the sphere selected. Go into local view by hitting /, hit tab, and instead of unwrapping based on the this one here, go down to sphere projection, left click. Now over here it looks really crazy, like something happened that's really wrong. Okay, go down here, click the down arrow, and then where you have this here, make sure that when you click the direction, you don't want it to view on equator. You want to click this align to object. And once you do that, you'll see that now it's projected this UV unwrap into our UV grid here. And if we hit tab and we look at our object, you can see that now it is a more proper spherical unwrap job. So yes, you do have a little bit of this thing going on here. That's okay. You'll see that it actually is completely fine. And then at the bottom, you see that there is this as well. So, you know, you may think that this isn't really, the perfect way and all that. That's fine. I totally understand that. But for the purposes of what we're going to be doing, this is actually going to work out beautifully. So you don't really need to worry about those couple of issues. You should be completely fine with using this method, especially when we look at it from the view of the camera. That is not going to be an issue for us. So don't worry about that. So once we're done with that fix there, hit / on your numpad to get back out of the that view, the local view. Make sure that you add back your materials. Don't forget to do this, because if you don't change these back to what they were and you close down your file, you can actually lose. You'll actually lose some of your materials. Really quick, if you want to make sure that never happens, go over here and click this little shield, and that will make it to where that will never happen. I'm going to deselect that though, because it's fine. Let's actually change the cube. Go back to our shading tab here and unselect this from the base color. And we'll just leave that over there for now. Go back to our layout. We'll do this from the layout and click our cone back here, drop down, gray cone, and hit save. And now we are ready in the next tutorial, the next part, to show how these UV unwraps are going to, how we're going to use that to map a 2D image to create some textures onto our objects and make a more higher quality and complicated, but overall more visually pleasing and realistic materials for our basic objects here. One more thing before we leave, I know I keep saying that, we need to make sure that we actually unwrap our background. So let's go back out of here, select the background, and hit Tab. And what we're going to do is go into the UV editing. We don't need to go into a local view here because it's so big. And if we look over here, after we go into edit mode and we look at our UV grid, look at this. It's kind of like weird, right? And it's basically from the cube that we started with. Here's the bottom of the cross that's been subdivided because we added those loop cuts, and then the left side of the cross is still there. But this isn't going to work, and you don't have to do this. I'm just going to show you really quick. If I go into the shading tab, I add an image texture and choose the UV grid and pipe that into here. Look at that. You can, and let's go back to the UV right here. You can see how that is not going to work. You know, it's the image that we map onto this is going to be all screwed up. So what we're going to do here is make sure that you have everything selected, hit U to unwrap, and you get this sort of like weird sort of shape here. I'm going to rotate this, maybe like do it like that, scale it down a little bit, and just make sure it fits in here. And you know, it's not perfect or anything, but it's good enough for what we're going to be doing. And if we look at how it's being mapped onto this onto the background here, we no longer have those weird issues. You can see that there's no visible seams, and if we go to the camera view here, our 2D image will be mapped completely fine onto this object. So let's go ahead and remove that from the shading tab. Take this pipe out, click this actually and hit X to delete it. Go to the layout and we will save, file, save. And that is going to be it for this tutorial. So I hope you guys learned something about the UV unwrapping, and in the next tutorial, we're going to be adding more complicated textures that give a more realistic view or realistic rendering of our objects. Um, Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next part. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, and make sure that you hit the little bell icon to notify you when new videos are uploaded. And I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.